Hello, everyone. I haven't done online content in a while. Lately, I've been doing a lot of reading and writing for shits and giggles. Anyway, I recently wrote a story for my love of Tremors inspired me to do so. Just in case you haven't noticed all my tweets on Twitter. It's just a silly tale, but I like the tone of it. I hope you enjoy it. Stick around to the end for special thanks and bloopers. But before I start, I do want to thank one person, one very special person named Steve S.S. Wilson. Thank you for creating Tremors and for being a quality human being. We love you. Enjoy. Good day, fellow humans. This is Beetle Bear, otherwise known as Kevin Collins, and I wrote a story called Writing Perfection, based in the Tremors universe, and I'm going to read it for you. And here we go. Part 1, Inspiration. It was 2:36 a.m. when Wilson Stevens filled the remaining white space of his latest novel with the last 2 words he would ever write, the end. He was shaking with excitement, or with a bit of hunger. He couldn't remember the last time he ate. The last few hours or days clouded in a blur of frantic fingers and the light burn of the old cathode ray tube monitor he still used to write just about anything. He was much too jumpy to sleep, so he decided to eat, but only after he snagged another glance at that last paragraph he was so proud of. Perfection, he whispered, grinning in a way that a person does when they know nobody's watching. He wandered into the kitchen, the inner voice in his head reciting bits and pieces from the novel that tickled him. Lost in thought, Wilson bumped into the counter only to find that it was the handle of an 8-inch chef's knife so haphazardly placed it was tipping over the edge. It swiveled and twisted in slow motion, a victim of gravity. It struck the floor, balanced on the tip, vibrating like a tuning fork. "Shit!" he yelped, shifting back from the knife. It missed his foot by less than an inch. He pulled the knife from the floor and tossed it in the sink, opening the freezer door with his free hand. Nothing but TV dinners. He took one and placed it into the microwave, hitting a few buttons and taking a seat at the table, which was covered with various publications. The pile consumed the table with the exception of one small area where Wilson had carved out enough space to fit a plate. The microwave hummed and Wilson waited. He was normally a very patient man, but something about finishing the novel excited him. He poked through the publications with a bony finger, causing an avalanche that spilled on the floor. As he reached for the spilled goods, one magazine caught his eye. A not yet out-of-date People magazine. Valentine and Earl dominated the cover in red type, an image of 2 men with question marks masking their faces. Where are they now? Do graboids really exist? Page 32, at the bottom of the cover. The microwave beeped and Wilson rose with People still in his hand. He absent-mindedly wandered towards it, flipping pages, trying to find page 32. He remembered hearing about these men and the supposed monster they were hunting on some news program, or maybe it was in another issue of People. Either way, the idea of giant underground monsters who lived in the dirt seemed ridiculous to him. He figured it would be great material to distract him from the novel and the shit he was about to eat. He sat with the slop, gentle wisps of steam licking his face, his eyes locked on page 32 of People. Without looking, he jammed a massive forkful of it in his mouth, ejaculating it an instant later. It was devoid of flavor, and his tongue wanted to crawl out of his mouth and die. He threw away the meal and finished reading the article on Valentine and Earl. The article reports that they lived in a town called Perfection, and claim it is infested with giant worms that murder people. An idea crashed through the window of his mind. Instead of handing the novel to his editor, he would take a few days, drive out to Perfection, and immerse himself in the lore and legends surrounding the area. It would be a good distraction to break the fever he built up with the novel. For now, it was time to sleep. Wilson was tired and was fast asleep as soon as he closed his eyes. Part 2. The Journey. Wilson left Los Angeles at 6 a.m., leaving the ocean waves and smog behind for a while. His thoughts kept drifting and he found it difficult to keep the novel out of his mind. The journey would take over 8 hours to complete, and he wasn't sure if Perfection had a hotel, motel, or no tell. He would sleep in the car if it came down to it. He only planned to be there for a few days. It was a beautiful drive for the first few hours, as he drove northeast through the hills and mountains on his way to Nevada. Eventually, he stopped at a diner on the east side of the Rockies. The visual outlook seemed barren, distant, and dusty. He pulled over several times on the endlessly straight Nevada highways to spread out a large paper map, making sure he was on the right track. He didn't know about other states, but figured Highway 96 was the longest, contiguously straight road out of all the United States of America. Hours passed, and the highway scenery seemed frozen in time, making it impossible to discern progress. A sign began to grow on the horizon. Wilson hoped to hell that it said Roaring River Road, because that's where he needed to go, and there hadn't been any kind of rest stop for hours. Not good when you desperately needed to pee. As soon as he read the sign, he yelled, "Yeah!" slapping the steering wheel with both hands. He gripped the wheel and eased onto Roaring River Road, which led off to the north, disappearing into the side of a small mountain. 15 minutes later, Wilson spotted another sign, Perfection Valley, 5 miles. The road narrowed and ran straight through the mountain. Wilson slowed through the pass and beheld the sight of a massive valley on the other side, completely surrounded by similar ridges. On his left, to the west, Roaring River Falls could be seen, its waters trickling off a precipice in the rock face. It certainly wasn't roaring, and the ground around it looked thirsty. As Wilson continued north, the satellite radio came on, full blast, in the middle of some twangy-sounding country song. He glanced down. The display read, "Reba McEntire, Is There Life Out There?" He tried the volume knob, but it didn't seem to make a difference. Looking up, he could see a fork in the road, some miles ahead. From his current altitude, he could see just about everything in the basin of this valley. The song ended, and after a brief silence, seemed to play a very similar-sounding song. He checked the display again. It seemed frozen on the Reba song, horizontal glitches flickering in the pixels. He mashed the stop button, the pause button, and every other button he could, to no avail. He gave up, focusing on the road. Wilson looked up to find the fork rushing at him. His vision narrowed, like it was trying to retreat from the fork. He slammed on the brakes, the back tires pulling to the right before he came to a screeching halt. The song stopped and started again. The road ended here. To the right, a sign said Perfection itself was to the east. He turned right down a road with no name in the direction of a town he thought to be made up. As he traveled along, some shape became caught in the corner of his eye. He jerked his head and looked through the side window. A geyser appeared to be bursting from the earth a fair distance away. As he was about to look away, he saw another blast, and yet another. He was transfixed by this when he suddenly remembered to keep his eyes on the road. That Reba song drilling into his head. He peered over the wheel, only to find another blur was directly in front of him. His foot was a blur as it slammed on the brake pedal. He pulled on the wheel, trying to brace himself, but it spun instead. Time seemed to crawl as the Land Rover bounced off the side of the front tire and lifted itself into the air, rotating. A pen gracefully danced in the air before Wilson's face. He thought he might be able to reach out and grab it, when reality suddenly came crashing in. Time sped up. The rover stopped spinning in favor of undulating rapidly. The pen shot backward, lancing Wilson in the eye. 1,000 angry giants beat on his body with their titanic fists, with each blow the light of his mind becoming dimmer. A sledgehammer slammed into his forehead, and the light blinked out. Part 3. Wake up! There is sound around Wilson, but it is distant. Sound shapes itself like the inner surface of a sphere, with him at the center. Everything is light, but it feels like he's looking at it through 2 sets of eyelids. When he opens one, the other closes, like the trickery of a finger trap. The sphere of sound shrinks around him, but the sound doesn't get louder. It gets more distinct. Wilson slowly opens his eye. The other one feels like a piece of rubber connected to sore muscle. It doesn't feel right. He is disoriented, having been recently upside down and out. He now finds himself sitting upright. His side window is smashed out. Through it he sees a coyote staring at him on the shoulder of the road. Fresh tire tracks lie just beyond the coyote, leading in Wilson's direction. He blinks in disbelief as to what caused the accident, and something in the other eye quivers and breaks loose. The sound of the world begins to fade away and grow louder. The world turns white. "And time is a friend," Reba sings. The speakers crackle like water, hitting hot oil, and repeats, "And time is a friend," and continues to do this over and over. Wilson stares, shocked. The windshield has a fresh crack spanning its diagonal length, the point of some impact exploding into a cobweb across its surface. The Coyote leaps onto the hood of the Rover and looks at Wilson. He looks back, disbelieving. He tries to blink, but feels this terrible popping sensation in his bad eye. He blacks out again. This time the sensation is darkness, empty, complete darkness. Yet Reba remains. The darkness begins to fade, taking the song with it. Wilson slowly opens his eye. The other still doesn't feel right, but it feels like there's something on it. He feels for his eye and finds some kind of bandage or cloth. The other eye is starting to focus. Wilson finds himself to be in some kind of antique or junk shop. Rows of dusty junk, aisles, a cash register with a woman. "Hey," he groans, reaching out in her direction. "Hey, you're alive," a deep, gravel-filled voice boomed to his right. Wilson turned, so his good eye could see the source of the voice, and saw a man kneeling over him. He seemed to be wearing a lot of denim, like a country tuxedo due to the belt and bolo tie. He had some kind of gun in a holster on his right hip. He had a gentle face worn thick by the weather, a forest of scruff conquering the landscape from ear to ear, friendly, concerned eyes. "You okay, mister?" His eyebrows raised, genuine concern, interest. "Where am I? What happened?" Wilson asked, a little too hard. He could feel it in his eye. "You're in perfection. You got hurt. I brought you here," scruffy cowboy guy said. "You brought me here? How? Why? Who are you?" Just then, the woman from the register walked up and leaned down with a bottle of water in one hand, offering it to Wilson. The cap was off. Wilson accepted it and took a small sip. "My name is Clancy Hoggarts," Clancy, the cowboy, Hoggarts said. The water seemed to find crevasses and ravines that Wilson had no idea existed on his lips. It wound its way through these narrow paths, like a great rain filling thirsty riverbeds. As it hit his tongue, every nerve in his mouth exploded and screamed. He started to guzzle the bottle. "Hey now, slow down. You get sick drinking fast like that," Clancy said, those eyebrows again, genuine concern. Wilson wished he had his notebook. These were good observations. He slowed his guzzle, but ended up looking like a baby tugging on a bottle, undulating his chin with each audible gulp. Part 4. Needful. "You're one tough son of a bitch, mister. What's your name?" Clancy asked, the small dimples above his eyebrows making him look genuinely puzzled. "Wilson. Stevens," he groaned, watching the woman return to the register. "Who's that?" Wilson said, while turning his head slightly in her direction, keeping his eyes on Clancy. "Oh, she's Miss Chang. She runs the place," Clancy explained. Wilson started to get up. He was sore all over, but it seemed like he didn't break anything but his eye. As he stood up, he asked, "How did I get here? What happened to my eye?" And before Clancy could respond, Wilson jerked and said, "My car! Where's my car?" "Whoa now, hold on, mister," Clancy said, stepping back with his arms held out in that universal, I-mean-you-no-harm kind of way. "Listen, you have to tell me where my car is," Wilson shouted, shoving past Clancy and the pain throbbing in his right eye. As he stormed toward the outside light, peering through the windows, he realized that this place was some kind of convenience store or gas station, or both. He slammed through the front door, grimacing as he flooded into the bright light of the afternoon. It was so bright he had to shield his eye with one hand, trying to focus on what he could see. A dirt road, running through the center of what might be considered a town if it were built in the 19th century. The only vehicle that he could see was a large, battered pickup truck that most definitely belonged to Clancy. Hand-painted into the black matte finish of the door read, "Clancy's Kick-Ass Service." Clancy ripped through the door and was grabbing at Wilson's shoulder, saying, "Mister," over and over. Wilson spun around to face Clancy and grabbed him with both hands, like grabbing granite with cloth draped over it. Clancy had looked concerned, puzzled, and interested before. Now Clancy looked angry. Clancy didn't look like he wanted to fuck around anymore. With one hand, Clancy ripped the door open, and with the other, shoved Wilson through the door. "Get inside, damn it!" he shouted, boulders of gravel coating his vocal cords this time. Wilson was on his knees, looking up at Clancy when he walked inside. "Please, Clancy, that was your name, right? Clancy? I'm an author. I came out here for some research, but..." Wilson trailed off. "But what?" Clancy shouted, squinting one eye. Wilson's voice grew weak and soft. "I brought my finished novel with me. I finished it last night. It was stupid." He paused, looking down, beads of sweat dripping from his face onto the dry floor. Everything was thirsty here. "But I need to get it. It was perfect. Perfection." He looks around, a potential light bulb trying to ignite filament in his mind. "Just like this town. Perfection. You see? You understand, don't you, Clancy?" He stammered, then looked over at Miss Chang with the pleading eyes of a child. "You don't understand, man. There are monsters out there. They'll eat you alive," Clancy shouted, punctuating each syllable by pointing at Wilson. Wilson had felt vulnerable, but now he was feeling a little funny. He got off his knees and stood up, leaning in close to Clancy, as if to share a secret. "Do you say monsters?" he asks. "Yeah, damn it. Graboids. It's been on the news. You been living under a rock?" Clancy asks. "Actually, yes. I mean, the graboids, not the living under a rock part." Wilson was patting himself off, head held high, straightening himself up. "That's why I came here. I thought it was complete bullshit, and that if there were anything here, it would make for a great story." He paused. "But I don't believe a word of it. Where's the proof?" he concluded. Clancy leaned in to meet Wilson, who could now see the one eye that wasn't squinted closed was quivering madly. "It ain't bullshit." They stayed like this for almost a minute, Clancy's face growing red, the muscles under the collar quivering with rage. Clancy spins around and slaps the door frames, sending a cloud of dust from the rafters, creating columns of solid light as they pass into the eye of the window. With his other hand, he rips the door open and storms outside, gets into his truck, and peels away, leaving a massive cloud of dust in his wake. "Sorry about him. He has a temper," Miss Chang said from the right, Wilson turning his entire body to see her with his good eye. She had a sweet and caring face. It seemed to be a quality around here. I forgot to thank you earlier," Wilson stammered, "for the bottle of water, and maybe this bandage too?" He touched the cloth over his eye with a hand. She looked at him, her face trying to hide something funny. She put her hand over her mouth, obviously trying to hide a laugh. "What? What's so funny?" Wilson said, genuinely puzzled. "That's not a bandage. That's Clancy's neck rag." She burst out laughing, holding her belly with both hands. Wilson's other eye darted around frantically, seeming to search for a glimpse of the rag. His imagination was going wild with what could be on such a horrible thing. Sweat? Snot? Blood? Before he could drill too deep into his mind, Miss Chang touches his hand. She stopped laughing and was now looking at him with sad, empathetic eyes. "You can use the phone over there to call a tow truck. The closest place is in Bixby, 30 miles from here. Let me get you their number." "Thanks," Wilson says, digging in his pocket for change. He hadn't used a payphone in a long time. It felt like an old friend, a lifeline somewhere. As he picked up the receiver, the ground started to vibrate. Wilson paused and steadied himself, wondering if he might have brain damage from the accident. Maybe if he focused or meditated or did both at the same time, it would go away. The vibration grew into a slow rumble. The coin return of the payphone sounded like a mini jackhammer. Then it stopped. "Earthquake?" he murmured. "What?" Miss Chang called. Wilson turned his head to face Miss Chang and shook it slightly, closing his good eye gently. "Nothing. Never mind." He turned back to the phone and called the towing place Miss Chang gave him the number for. He slammed the receiver down, feeling furious. 30 miles away, but they can't get anyone out here till Tuesday? Not Monday, which is tomorrow, but Tuesday. He suddenly realized he was lecturing Miss Chang, and she was nodding and listening like they knew each other for years. Part 5. "Sir, please don't do that." Outside, a low rumble faded into the sound of tires. Wilson yelled, "Shit!" as Clancy's big pickup skidded to a stop, launching a cloud of dust up and over the truck bed like a scorpion, ready to strike. Wilson started slapping the side of the phone box with his right hand, yelling, "Shit!" over and over. Miss Chang stepped back, slowly saying, "Sir? And please?" Wilson was too engrossed to hear. The door flung open, slamming into a comic book rack. Clancy strutted in with a purpose. As his eyes adjusted to the dim interior of the market, he focused on Miss Chang, who was pointing to his right. Wilson was still slapping the phone box when he suddenly felt a vice tighten around his wrist. As he turned his head, sweat flung. Clancy winced. Clancy spat a little, with puckered lips. Wilson stared at him with one eye, a human cyclops, his mouth agape. "The hell is wrong with you?" Clancy yelled, tightening his grip on Wilson's wrist. "Please, I need to get my manuscript. It's my only copy. I'll give you $100 if you help me," Wilson pleaded. Clancy huffed and let go, flinging Wilson's arm away from him as if he were a petulant child. He turned around and walked over to the standing coolers. Wilson could see Clancy was wearing boots now. He opened the cooler and pushed himself into its frosty vapors, snatching a bottle of Miller Lite. He closed the cooler and stared at Wilson, took off his hat and raised the bottle to his forehead, beads of condensation falling to the floor. He came up to Wilson and put his hat on, jamming the bottle into his mouth and ripping the cap off. He spit it into the garbage can next to the door. $100, you say?" Clancy inquired, taking a long swig from his beer, keeping one interested eye on Wilson. Before Wilson could answer, Clancy stopped sucking on his bottle and said, $150. Raising his chin, his eyes looking down on Wilson, it was a challenge. Wilson didn't care. Yes, let's go now, man." Wilson started for the door, but Clancy grabbed his right arm in that vice grip. "How do I know you have $150? Clancy said, squinting an eye. Wilson stopped, shocked for a moment, not knowing where his wallet was. He patted his pant pockets. Nothing. He started to panic. He jammed a hand into his left pocket and pulled it out. Nothing. He felt like a cartoon character. He jammed his other hand into his right pocket, looking directly at Clancy with hopeless, defeated eyes. Wait. Wilson's eyes widened, and he slowly withdrew his arm from the pocket, bringing his hand to intersect their gaze. A thin money clip made of steel. Wilson ripped the money from the clip and started to count it. Clancy watched with interest. Miss Chang watched from afar. He stopped counting, money clip in his left hand, money itself in his right. It was quivering. He slowly raised the money hand towards Clancy. "It's only $23. Please, man!" Wilson tried to shove the money into Clancy's pocket, but it was buttoned. It looked like he was trying to pet his chest. "You're gonna get yourself killed!" Clancy threatened and grabbed his wrist. Wilson yelped. Wait, my wallet is in my car. I have plenty of money in my wallet, and credit cards too. Whatever you want." Wilson was desperate. Every minute that ticked by, the more foolish he felt for bringing the manuscript with him. He should have put it in a safe deposit box or something. It would have been safer at home, he thought. He also knew he would be broke if he didn't get the book to his editor. He would be ruined. He missed L.A., and he desperately wanted to go back and get medical attention. Clancy released Wilson, pushing him back. "I'm not taking your money, 'cause I ain't going, no matter what," he shouted. Clancy stormed off, past the register, into the back of the market. Miss Chang stepped out from behind the register with her hands clasped together in front of her and said, "Excuse me, but I have an old bike I'll sell you for what you got there." She smiled, nodding the bills in his hand. Wilson lifted the money hand, shaking it wildly. "Yes, please, thank you." He ran over, handing the bills to her with both hands, gently. Where's the bike?" he asked, looking around, bewildered. "This way," she says, walking towards the back of the store. Down the hallway, they exited through a door. Clancy was in some kind of dirt yard in the back, riding a horse. Wilson heard a clicking sound to his right and turned his entire body in order to see what was approaching. It was a bicycle that seemed older than time. "It's the cross-country model. It's been in my family forever," she said. "The tires are pumped, and I brought you a patch kit just in case." She handed him a small black box. He stuck it in his pocket. Thanks, he said, grabbing the handlebars. He started to walk the bike away. You know, he's not making it up. The graboids, I mean. They're real, she said with an absolute tone. Part 6. A Personal Victory. Wilson walked the bike around the side of the building and onto the compacted dirt lot connected to the main road. He threw his leg over and mounted the bike. He was a bit shaky at first. It's been forever since he was last on one, but eventually he got his balance and started pedaling. With every revolution of the gear, the bike made a little squeak. Wilson thinks that he should have asked Miss Chang if she oiled the chain, but it's too late now. He just wants to get his fucking manuscript. He pedals out past the dirt and onto the asphalt, the late afternoon sun directly in his eye. He keeps raising his left hand to shield his eye, but the bike seems to need both hands to keep straight. After what seems like an endless journey into the light, Wilson finds himself thirsty, his head pounding, too hot, like it's insulated somehow. Up ahead, he sees the rover. His heart jumps. He feels energized, like nothing happened. He can't fool himself, though. This entire time he's been avoiding a complete panic attack just thinking about his eye. It still doesn't feel right. Anytime he starts to think about blindness, he walls himself up. The squeak of the bike has been getting louder, and like that Reba song, is starting to drill into his head. The squeak is the passage of time, of distance. It has meaning. Squeak, 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 squawk. Several meters from where the rover flew off the road, the bike chain snapped and Wilson's feet spun wildly. He wasn't expecting it and ended up with his head flinging forward. His head catches the middle of the handlebar where it's thick. His face follows and a tooth snaps off. It doesn't hurt. It just feels wrong. But his lip hurts. He probably cut it with the tooth. The pain blossoms and begins to throb with the rhythm of his heartbeat. Wilson and his bicycle fall to the ground with a thud. He spits out the piece of tooth swimming around in his mouth along with a wad of bloody saliva as he hits the ground. He feels sick. He feels green. He recovers and stands up, amazed that he didn't hurt himself more seriously. Wilson takes a mental note to stay away from vehicles for a while and starts to wander towards the rover. The first thing that he notices, now that he can focus, is the driver's door is open. And time is a friend. And time is a friend. And time is a friend. Reber grows louder as he approaches. His pace quickens. And time is a friend. Wilson reaches the door and peers into the car. He can see the matte black box containing his manuscript on the floor opposite to him. His manuscript seeming to gleam in the shadow of the seat as the hellish early evening rays of the sun battered on the back of the SUV. He lunges for it, but realizes he needs to actually climb into the vehicle in order to reach it. So he does, bringing his knee up on the seat and his other leg hanging out of the car. He grabs the wheel and reaches for the box. His fingers were within an inch of the box when it began to vibrate. His eyes widened. Was he experiencing a miracle? Was his manuscript really that good? Vibrating with natural energy? The entire car started to vibrate, and within seconds it was violently jumping up and down. The tires popped, not all at once, but in a diagonal pair. Wilson dives in and wrenches the door closed, causing small shards of glass to break free from the window. He looks around to see that all the side windows were broken in the original crash. Only the windshield and back window remain. The shaking suddenly stops. Wilson remains still, with his one pupil darting around wildly. He was holding his breath. What the fucking fuck was going on? The rag over his eye felt wet, getting heavier. The front of the rover suddenly lurches up into the air, throwing Wilson back against the seat. It stayed like this for a few seconds before it was violently dropped, the entire vehicle bouncing terribly as it tried to rest. A massive fleshy mass came through the driver's window and slapped Wilson on the side of the face, smearing a residue like raw egg whites all over his cheek and forehead. The thing seemed to try and grab his ear, but he slapped it away, feeling it pulsate as he did so. It started coiling and thrashing wildly. It looked like a massive snake that had been skinned alive and allowed to live in misery. He stared at it. Two more joined it and started seeking, like the tongues of a hungry animal. Wilson pushed toward the passenger side of the car, wrenching his neck to look through its windows, in case more of these snake tongue things were coming up from that direction. None were. but the other ones were wrapping themselves around the window frame between the front and back windows and jerking on the frame of the car. As the car began to tip in that direction, Wilson pulled himself out of the passenger window, kneeling on that side of the car as it became the new roof. The ground really started to shake now. It sounded like 1,000 bumps on the head, undulating under his skull. He looked to the left and his jaw dropped. Hundreds, if not thousands of cattle were rushing toward him. Capitulate. He cowered and covered his head with both arms as they parted the rover, like a rock in the middle of a rushing river. He pulled his arms away and looked to where the stampede was rushing. The last of them passed, minus a few slowpokes, but it seemed like it was over. A smaller cow or calf trotted by. Wilson watched it for perhaps 20 yards before it seemed to fall into a hole in the ground with a yelping sound. Wilson jumped to his feet, still on the side of the overturned rover, in disbelief. He was listening intently for the calf.
"Hurry, get the fuck over here, asshole!"
a gravelly voice screamed. Wilson turned to see Clancy on a horse, waving his hat at him.
"Look for yourself,"
Clancy yelled, pointing towards the stampede. Wilson looked and saw a massive, fleshy figure rising out of the ground. A steer came up with it. It looked like a brown elephant with no legs or head, fat in the middle of its long body and tapered at the ends. It was massive. The top of it parted 3 ways, and the steer seemed to vanish into it. It thrashed itself back and forth before driving itself into the earth, like a massive piston.
"Get over here, damn it!"
Clancy yelled again. Wilson had seen enough. He ran down the side of the rover and leaped off the back onto the ground, almost losing his balance, but hitting the ground running. As he ran, his legs were acid fire. He hadn't had any water yet, and his body needed things to do things. He was starting to cramp in one thigh, but was nearly there. The ground was rumbling again and getting closer. He felt like the world was closing in on him, from behind him, the entire galaxy trying to consume him with its massive celestial mouth. Mere feet from Clancy now, whose face looked extremely worried. His hand was out, his mouth twisting in slow motion. Wilson leaps towards the horse, his arm out, time crawling to a stop, grains of desert floating by. As he flew, he immediately felt cold and humidity around his legs. Clancy grabbed him and swung him up, belly first onto the horse.
"Yah!"
he yelled, digging his heels into the horse. Something grabbed Wilson's right leg, which was dangling off the side of the horse, and pulled. He braced himself against the other side of the horse the best he could. The thing pulled again. His pants and shoe came off completely. A moment of freedom before he feels his other leg yanked violently toward the back of the horse. A second later, his other shoe flies off, following the pants. As the horse rushes off with Wilson bouncing on its ass, he's staring behind. The thing had launched itself out of the ground like a sea lion on ice, thrashing its body, seeming to wave Wilson's pants in the air. Slightly away and up a hill, a coyote sits, staring in his direction. He wonders if it's the same coyote that started all of this. It turns and runs up and over the hill, disappearing from sight. The last thing Wilson sees is the manuscript box, soaking up the last rays of setting light. The cover is off, and a gust seems to be flipping through its contents, flipping pages into the air, where they are carried off into oblivion. The thing launches itself up and into the air, slamming down next to the manuscript, pulling it into the earth, where it is buried forever. It's a loss he can accept. He feels grateful for his life. Wilson looks up at Clancy, the cherry of his cigarette swooshing in the twilight, and decides he might stay for a while. He just might. The end. Thanks for watching and or listening. I just wanted to give a special thanks out to a couple of individuals. Nancy Roberts, Steve S.S. Wilson, Brent Maddock, Ron Underwood, and the entire Stampede Production team. Thank you so much for what you've done, what you've created, what kind of tone you've set, what kind of mood you've set, and everything else that you will do soon. Extra special super bonus thanks to Levi Dillon, who is at OMeGan Smiles on Twitter, OMEGAN SMILES. At the Tremors Saga on Twitter. I shouldn't have to spell that out, but at TheTremors on Twitter. Right? There's 2 S's. Don't forget. Hashtag Stampede Tremors. Hashtag Talking Tremors. Hashtag Tremor Story, which I'm trying to start. We'll see. If you have questions for Stampede, go ahead and visit their website, stampede-entertainment.com. Thank you, and enjoy the very limited quantity of bloopers. Always drink water. It's very important. Ahem.
Look for yourself.